The bloody throne war of the Harem. How Nurbanu and Safiye devoured each other. The Venetian ambassador used to say that the real throne of the Ottoman Empire in the last quarter of the 16th century was not the golden divan in the second courtyard, but a single cushioned sofa behind a gilded lattice window in the Harem-i Hümayun. From that sofa, two women ruled the world's most powerful empire, while the Sultan himself drifted further and further into Cypriot wine, Persian opium, and the arms of beautiful slaves bought for the price of entire annual tax revenue of Wallachia. This is the true story of Sultan Murad III, but it is not his story at all. It is the story of the two lionesses who devoured each other for 21 years in slow motion. Valide Nurbanu Sultan, born Cecilia Venier Baffo on a Venetian galley, kidnapped by Barbarossa's corsairs, sold in the Istanbul slave market for the price of 3 Arabian horses, risen to Queen Mother with ice in her veins and death in her smile. And Safiye Sultan, born Sofia Baffo in the mountains of Albania, captured at 13, renamed the Pure One, owner of the most dangerous pair of venom-green eyes the Topkapı Harem had ever seen. Between them stood the sickly, dreamy, fatally indulgent Murad III, the man who inherited the empire at its absolute zenith and left it cracked forever, bleeding gold from every wound. The night the lioness died and the serpent was born. 11th December 1574, the night everything changed. The bells of Galata tolled across the Golden Horn like funeral drums. Inside Topkapı, no one dared breathe. Selim II, Selim the Sot, had collapsed dead drunk in the marble hammam, his head split open on the Göbektaşı. The corpse was still warm, still smelling of anise raki, when the black eunuchs ran barefoot to the harem. Nurbanu Sultan was already awake. She was barely 40, but her hair had gone silver from 20 years of nightmares about fratricide. She did not scream. She simply closed her famous Venetian blue eyes, whispered, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and gave the order that would decide the next century. Lock every gate. Hang the keys around Gazanfer Ağa's neck. My son will sit on the throne before the sun rises, or every head in this palace will roll. In less than 6 hours, the pale, poetic prince of Manisa, the boy who wrote verses about roses dying in winter, was dragged half asleep from his bed, wrapped in the sable kaftan of his ancestors, girded with the sword of Osman, and proclaimed the 12th Ottoman Sultan while his father's blood was still being scrubbed from the hammam floor. That same night, in the long dormitory where new concubines slept on thin mattresses, an 18-year-old girl with honey blonde hair and eyes the color of poisoned emeralds sat bolt upright. Sofia Baffo, now Safiye, had already borne Murad a son in Manisa. She understood politics better than most viziers. If Nurbanu controlled the night of accession, Nurbanu would control the empire for the next 30 years. Safiye rose, wrapped herself in a ferace of blood-red silk, and walked barefoot through the sleeping corridors until she reached the Valide's golden door. The Kishlar Ağa, towering and terrifying, blocked her path. She smiled the smile that would one day topple grand viziers, pressed a diamond the size of a hazelnut into his enormous palm, and whispered, "Tell the Valide her new daughter has come to kiss her hand." Inside, Nurbanu was burning letters in a silver brazier. The flames painted orange shadows on her sharp cheekbones. Safiye knelt. "Anneciğim," she said, a word no concubine had ever dared use to a living Valide Sultan. Nurbanu looked up slowly. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of secrets turning to ash. Then the older woman laughed, a low, dangerous sound like a dagger leaving its sheath. "Little snake," she answered in perfect Venetian Italian. "You will either be the death of me or my sharpest sword. We shall see." That was the night the war began. A war with no armies, no cannons, only perfume, poison, and silk bowstrings. 1578. The year England discovered the Ottoman court, and Safiye discovered diplomacy. Queen Elizabeth I needed allies against Catholic Spain. She sent a secret envoy, William Harborne, with mechanical clocks that chimed the hours, mirrors that doubled a man's ego, and a life-size portrait of a flame-haired virgin queen wearing a dress made of pure silver thread. Safiye received him in the Harem gardens under a canopy of jasmine, while Murad, half drunk on rose sherbet laced with opium, watched giggling from behind the latticed screen. She spoke to the Englishman in flawless Italian, laughed at his jokes, touched his sleeve by accident, and finally sent Elizabeth the most scandalous gift in diplomatic history: a 6-horse coach painted crimson and gold, driven by female slaves dressed as male pages. When the coach paraded through London, priests fainted and Puritans screamed about the whore of Babylon. In Istanbul, it announced one thing: a new power had risen behind the lattice. Nurbanu watched from her window, knuckles white on the carved wood. That coach had been paid for with 80,000 gold ducats diverted from the Egyptian treasury, money that should have paid the Janissaries. She began writing nightly letters to the aging Grand Vizier Sokollu Mehmed Pasha, the last living link to the age of Süleyman the Magnificent. Every letter ended with the same 2 words: Venedikli Cadı, the Venetian witch. 1583. The Great Palace Fire and the Night of 19 Princes. 24th October 1583. A kitchen fire, supposedly started by an overturned oil lamp, spread through the harem with unnatural speed. Flames licked the cedar beams, smoke poured into the cafes where Murad's younger brothers were kept for their own safety. 19 princes, aged 3 to 17, perished. Their screams were heard as far as Üsküdar. Official verdict: tragic accident. Unofficial verdict, whispered by every chronicler from Gelibolu Mustafa Ali to the Venetian Bailo: Nurbanu ordered the fire to eliminate rival male lines, and Safiye personally supplied the Greek fire mixture because only her son Mehmed would remain heir. When the ashes cooled, Murad locked himself in his rooms and wept for 3 days straight. Then, in a haze of grief and hashish, he ordered the construction of a new private palace inside the harem, larger, more opulent, more decadent than anything the world had ever seen. He named it the House of Felicity. It cost the equivalent of 3 years' revenue from the Silk Road. The Janissaries went unpaid for 6 months. The borders began to bleed. 1585. The secret that almost killed an empire. Safiye, aged 30, fell pregnant again. The entire palace prayed for another prince. She gave birth to a girl. Within weeks, Nurbanu began whispering that Safiye's womb was cursed with daughters. In desperation, Safiye committed the most dangerous crime in Ottoman history. She bribed the midwives to smuggle in a newborn boy from the slums of Üsküdar, strangled the real daughter in secret, and presented the changeling as her own son. They named him Shehzade Mahmud. He had Safiye's unmistakable venom-green eyes, too green. By the time he was 6 months old, the palace was buzzing. Nurbanu smiled behind her pearl fan and waited like a spider. One spring night in 1586, Murad, drunk on Cypriot wine and black opium, stumbled into Safiye's apartments and saw the child nursing. In his drugged haze, he saw those eyes and screamed, "This is not my son. This is a demon with the eyes of Shaitan." He ordered mother and child drowned in the Bosphorus before dawn. Nurbanu arrived at the last second, veiled in black, and stopped the execution with a single sentence: "Kill the Haseki tonight, and tomorrow the Janissaries will tear your throne to pieces." Instead, she had Safiye and Mahmud confined to the old palace in Bayezid Square, a gilded prison. She spread the rumor that Safiye had tried to poison the Sultan with slow arsenic hidden in rose jam. Safiye spent 2 full years in exile, writing coded letters in lemon juice on silk handkerchiefs, training deaf-mute laundry girls as spies, and waiting for Nurbanu to make one fatal mistake. 1587. The Death of a Lioness. 7th December 1587. Nurbanu Sultan complained of chest pains after drinking her evening sherbet. She died within the hour. Official cause: heart failure. Unofficial cause: every Jewish physician in Istanbul suddenly bought new houses in Galata. That same night, while the body was still warm, Safiye walked into the Valide's apartments, escorted by 20 black eunuchs who now answered only to her. She knelt beside the deathbed, kissed the cold hand, and whispered in Venetian, "Addio, suocera. The throne is mine now." Then she slid the legendary emerald ring, the one said to have belonged to Harem Sultan herself, from Nurbanu's finger onto her own. 1595. The Death of a Sultan and the Birth of a Monster. 16 January 1595. Murad III died at 49, bloated, paranoid, covered in opium sores. His last words, according to the terrified chief physician, "Tell Safiye, the green-eyed demon won." Safiye, now Valide Sultan to her son Mehmed III, ordered a purge the likes of which the harem had never seen. Every concubine Murad had ever touched was strangled with silk cords. Every eunuch who had served Nurbanu disappeared into the Bosphorus weighted with stones. The empire watched in horror as the former Venetian slave girl became the most powerful human being on earth. But the curse followed her. Her stolen son Mahmud grew into the handsomest, cleverest, cruelest prince the palace had ever seen. By 1603, he was writing secret letters to the Janissaries, promising reform, land, gold, everything a bored army dreams of. Safiye understood. He was planning to overthrow her real son Mehmed and take the throne for himself. On a moonless night in June 1603, Mahmud was invited to his mother's private apartments for supper. He arrived in cloth of gold, wearing the same seductive smile Safiye had used at 18. They drank rare Rhodes wine. They laughed about old times. They toasted the memory of Nurbanu. At dawn, his body was found in the rose garden, strangled with a silk bowstring. Official story: he plotted against his sovereign. True story: his own mother ordered the murder, because in the house of Osman, love had always been the deadliest poison of all. Somewhere in whatever circle of hell is reserved for queen mothers, Nurbanu Sultan finally allowed herself a thin, satisfied smile. The war had lasted exactly 21 years. There were no survivors, only winners who became ghosts. And the empire, drunk on its own magnificence, began its long, glittering, inevitable descent into twilight, while the black waters of the Bosphorus kept every secret, waiting patiently for the next lioness to rise. The full forbidden chronicles, the lemon juice letters, the deaf spies' reports, the exact recipe for the slow poison that killed a Valide Sultan, the Greek fire formula that burned 19 princes alive. All of it still sleeps in dust covered in the Topkapi archives, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to read them by flickering candlelight on a blood-red night. But that is a story for another time.